Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and creepy horror stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Red Sky. The night I met the Wendigo. At 10 feet tall, it towered above me. Emaciated arms grazed against the frozen ground with claws made of ice. Blood dripped from ragged, withered antlers. It looked at me with bloodshot eyes and gave me an all-too-human smile despite its long, needle-like teeth. As it leaned closer, I smelled the wicked stench of death on its breath. It drew back its head, and let out a gut-wrenching howl that turned my blood to ice. Even so, I remained unfazed. Hypothermia had dulled my senses as the temperatures dropped. I had come here to die, and one way or another, it was going to happen. I was in too deep, and there wasn't much else to lose anymore. The thing happened to sense my acceptance of the inevitable, and sat next to me. Surprised, I met its glance. "Aren't you going to kill me?" It looked down upon me, and something in its expression changed. For a split second, it looked wise. Almost human. The sky grayed as it began to speak. "No." Its voice was low and rasping. "Your suffering now feeds me more than if you were dead." I stared off into the darkness. The thing next to me took out a glass jar. It was roughly the size of my head, but was dwarfed in the being's hands. As it opened it, its claws scraped against the glass like nails on a chalkboard. It looked down at me. "Your anger warms you now, but all fires burn out. You won't have much longer." It wasn't wrong. There was no way I should be alive right now. With a swift motion it struck my face with its claw, and sliced open my cheek. But no blood came. Instead, a milky, iridescent fluid leaked out of the wound. It billowed and swirled around my head. Memories. Beautiful, wonderful memories. I saw my sister, tall and lanky with wavy blonde hair spinning in her favorite skirt. I could almost hear her laugh. Dancing to the radio at midnight when she thought no one could hear. Squealing with delight as we sped down the highway with the windows down. I smiled. But soon the memories turned sour. I then saw her body, limp and broken after I took that turn too fast. The car was crumpled into a tree, and I could only watch, helpless as my life burned to the ground in front of me. I felt the heat rise up in my chest, but the creature collected the haze around me in a jar and shut it. I snapped back to a cold, gray reality. I felt numb. I couldn't feel anything. I didn't know anything. Who I was, where I was, or what was sitting in front of me with a terrible smile on its face. But at that point, I couldn't even care. "She forgives you," it said as it lumbered off into the night. I didn't know who he was talking about, but the snow around me had formed a warm blanket, the stars began to fade away, and I knew then that it was time for me to go. Second story. This story was shared by you/trash_tia. Every month, my college goes into lockdown. Starting at 8 p.m., please lock all Geminis inside their rooms. My college takes star signs way too seriously. Is that understood? The college dean was lecturing me, and I was staring down at my lap trying to fathom how I got myself in this situation. I had guards standing behind me acting like I was some escaped psychopath. Every time I moved, I noticed them snap to attention in the corner of my eye. I was supposed to belong here. I was supposed to find myself. But all I had found was a student body that were deadly serious about separating their students according to the zodiac. My gaze flicked to an astrology chart on the wall, with the school's least favorite sign scribbled out in permanent marker. The dean's office was an astrologer's wet dream. The dean herself was my mother's age, a scowling woman who was more shadow than person, a projector illuminating constellations across the room, casting her face in eerie white light. I had been lazily following Orion across the walls when she finally snapped, and I jerked to attention, my gaze flicking back to her. "Miss Oliver." I nodded in response, my cheeks burning. Orion skimmed across her face, and I found myself mesmerized by how beautiful the star was. Her office was fairly cozy, a messy kind of cozy. There were books and papers piled around her, empty coffee mugs and what looked like star maps spread across her laptop, coffee staining each corner. It was a mistake, I finally said through the gutter in my throat. It wasn't a mistake. But it's not like I could say that. For some reason, along with this college's draconian rules mapped around the zodiac of all things, there was one star sign in particular that had been outcast. I turned my attention back to the scribbled-out symbol. Gemini. If there was ever a zodiac that was hated, or not liked, Gemini was never that star sign. I grew up with kids in my class hating Pisces because they refused to be related to a fish. Or Cancer, because of the crab. Gemini was in the summer months, and the constellation, in my opinion, was beautiful. But not to these guys. Starting my freshman year, I started to realize how badly the Gemini students were being treated, with the guys getting the worst of it. Being a late admission, I was new, along with another kid who appeared to be the joker of the class at first. He was friendly enough, introducing himself with a grin. We were asked for our star signs as an icebreaker, or what I thought was an icebreaker, and he shrugged with a small smile. I think I'm a Gemini." He sounded unsure of himself, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah. I was born on June 10th. I'm a Gemini." I expected that to be the end of it, but I noticed a sudden shift in the air. Like the guy had just announced he had murdered his whole family. The girl sitting next to him inched away slowly, dragging her laptop with her, while the rest of the class seemed to collectively let out a breath before twisting to the back of the class. It was almost a robotic movement, their heads snapping around, eyes narrowing. I didn't even see them. The four students in the shadows, heads bowed over their MacBooks. The professor's expression seemed to crumple, his eyes darkening significantly. "I think." He spoke in a sharp breath, before seemingly collecting himself. "I think you should join your friends at the back," he said coldly. Until then, the professor had stapled himself as a cool teacher, a man in his early 40s sporting a long trench coat over jeans and t-shirt. Very chic. Especially with his Scottish accent. Now, it was like looking at a different person. He took slow steps back across the stage, almost stumbling. I could almost mistake his expression for fear. "I said," the professor's voice broke around the words, and something ice-cold wriggled its way down my spine. "I think you should join your friends." The Gemini kid seemed baffled, and a little hurt. The air was thick, every eye burning into him. I felt like they were looking at me too. The professor's eyes were wide, lips curled, like he might say something. But he just shook his head, seemingly gathering himself. "I'm confused," the kid laughed nervously, almost jumping out of his chair when a girl behind him kicked his bag across the floor. He sent her a questioning look. Is this some kind of joke?" Now. The professor wasn't even looking at him. But the boy tried to laugh. It's just a star sign, right? I will not ask you again, the professor said stiffly. He didn't move, as if doing so would mean being closer to the boy. He folded his arms across his chest. If you do not move to your designated seat right now, you're out of my class. To my surprise, the boy got up and moved to the back, ignoring students cringing away from him. He didn't speak again, sticking to his assigned group. I noticed everyone else had been separated into their zodiac signs. Leos were at the front, with Sagittarius and Libra surrounding them. The other star signs were harder to make out. I thought it was just that class who were taking the zodiacs a little too seriously. But no. This thing had spread across campus like a virus. Students didn't care about their grades, or what careers they were going to get. Because the star signs on the top of the social hierarchy had the faculty wrapped around their little finger. A Libra girl found out she was no longer compatible with a Scorpio, and stopped talking to him completely, ghosting him on social media and going as far as moving halfway across the classroom from him. The entire campus had gone fucking crazy. Including the faculty. It was only certain star signs who were allowed extra credit and invited into exclusive clubs while the rest of us were left in the dust, and Geminis were either treated like dirt or feared, like they were carrying a contagious disease. It was like going back to middle school. In the 6th grade, I was proud of my star sign. I liked to think I had a secret twin, after learning about the story behind the constellation. Castor and Pollux, twin brothers transformed into Gemini. I used to draw the twins on the backs of my hands, daydreaming up my very own. Mina Lucas, a Pixis, called me a two-faced bitch. Because Gemini had two faces. So, I called her an ugly fish. This was middle school, though. It is normal for kids to build personalities around star signs. College students, however, are grown adults. It was fine to base a crush around a star sign, or compatibility. But your whole life? Your social circle and education? It was bad enough that my classmates were brainwashed by stars, but the professors too. It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense that my roommate had a mental breakdown the night before because she didn't have anything blue to wear. According to her star sign, she had to wear blue to have a good day. Geminis were either mercilessly bullied by students and professors alike, or treated like they were invisible. I had noticed over the last few days, disgust had turned to fear. Instead of bullying Geminis, other students steered clear of them. I saw it contorted on every face, wary of the Gemini sitting near them, and presently, I saw it on my dean's face. She was scared of me. The woman may have seemed in control, but I noticed her finger anxiously tapping on her coffee mug, her gaze flashing to and from the clock on the wall. She was waiting for something, her demeanor tense, eyebrows furrowed. Every passing minute seemed to unnerve her even more. A mistake, she repeated my words, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Yes. I didn't look her in the eye, swiping my clammy hands on my jeans. What was I supposed to say? I didn't want to associate myself with what I thought was a trend, a TikTok thing that would fizzle out like everything else. But I was staring down at a handwritten letter crumpled between my fists, of an anonymous tattletale calling out my real star sign. The crossed O's stood out. Who wrote like that? I had been hiding under the facade of being a Sagittarius, since Sagittarius and Leo seemed to be the it signs. They stood on some fucking pedestal, ruling over campus like some messed up clique. The letter was like a slap in the face. I had half a mind to tear it into pieces. I stared down at it, my eyes stinging. This letter told me I didn't belong here. It told me that because the brainwashed hive mind on campus had decided to collectively despise the star I was born under, I was something to be feared, like an animal. Who sent it? I managed to get out. I squeezed the paper between my fist. Dearest Dean. The passive-aggressive tone made my blood boil. I would like you to know of a traitor amongst you, a Sagittarius by the name of Oliver, who is in fact a Gemini, smiley face. I am so sorry for ruining your day, sad face. Anon. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I looked up, the dean's glare was pinpointed directly in the middle of my forehead. If looks could kill. I don't know what to say, I squeezed out. She hummed. Well, you can start by explaining yourself. She had to be kidding, right? No. When I looked her dead in the eye, this woman was being serious. Miss Oliver, I am horrified that you would disguise yourself as a Sagittarius, she curled her lip. As one myself, I should have sensed that our energy was wrong. Polluted with your presence. But I let my guard down. I slammed the letter down this time. This woman was certifiably insane. Who sent this? I said again, this time harsher. That is none of your concern, the dean said. You lied, Miss Oliver. About my zodiac sign, I sucked in a breath, it's really not a big deal. Her eyes darkened. As you will discover, Miss Oliver, it is extremely important that we know where every Gemini is. Her gaze flashed to her MacBook screen. Especially when certain measures have been put in place. Measures? I straightened in my seat. What kind of measures? Her lip curled. You are a late arrival. It is your fault for not arriving on time. You're kidding, I found myself speaking through a scoff. I was done. It was one thing with students doing this. But grown adults? She was enabling this bullying, inciting a fear that shouldn't exist. It was like being on the playground, some stupid kid pronouncing that Geminis smelled, and the rest of the kids following along, forming a hive mind. But this was a 40-something-year-old. The dean couldn't justify it. And even if she tried, she would be declared fucking insane. I leaned forward, testing the boundaries. I wasn't surprised when the dean lurched back. Was it a bad experience? She blinked. I don't understand. A bad experience you had, I repeated. With a Gemini. I could sense the words suffocating my mouth, eager to slip out. After weeks of feeling like I was back in the 6th grade, finally confronting the root of the problem felt good. Platonic, or maybe sexual, I inclined my head. Or maybe he, or she ghosted you completely, so you've brainwashed a campus full of impressionable young students to punish people who cannot help being born between the months of May and June. I felt satisfaction when her expression twisted. Because that is all it is, what you're all unhealthy obsessed with, I spoke through my teeth this time, weeks of repressed anger bubbling over. They're just stars, I said, they don't mean anything to anyone, except children. Miss Oliver. See. Tracing along the constellation mapped out on her desk, I prodded each static light. To my confusion, it was the Gemini constellation, which was ironic. I stabbed at the two twin stars, Castor and Pollux, and then Alhina. I nodded to Orion, projected across the wall. Stars. They're just stars. Dead and dying planets, or if you're religious, your long-dead relatives. Whatever. I pointed at the map crinkled under her MacBook, and the dean once again flinched, her body angling its way away from me. She leaned away from me like I was contagious. One of the guards started forwards, no doubt to grab me, but she shook her head, maintaining that professional, if not slightly strained smile. There is no need, the dean spoke in a sharp breath, and the guard stepped back. Miss Oliver is understandably upset. She cleared her throat. Please vacate your current dorm and move into the old building across campus where we house Geminis without rooms. The dean stood before I could reply. I don't expect to see you in my office again. I grabbed my bag, getting to my feet. You're not throwing me out. Her lip twitched. We do not suspend Gemini students, Miss Oliver. But what if I want to leave? Her facial expression didn't waver. I'm afraid that is not possible. I nodded slowly, not completely registering her words. So, you're saying I can't leave? She shook her head. I am afraid not. I glanced at the guard behind me. Why can't I leave? Because of the measures in place. Something warm wriggled its way up my throat, and I tried to speak, before the guards were politely shoving me out of her office. The dean's words didn't leave my mind until I was halfway across campus, out of breath, and regretting every word I'd spat. She had sent me away with a warning, and in order to leave my dorm room effective immediately and move into the old building off of campus. I had seen it in passing, a large crumbling structure which used to be the old student dorm. The door was broken, bars on the windows. There was no way I was staying there. Instead, I figured couch crashing in a friend's dorm would be better. Elle was a Leo, and insisted she didn't care about star signs. Coming from a Leo, that was rich. She had the all-exclusive Leo experience. I was moving into her room later into the evening, playing cloak and dagger with the security guards on shift, when the announcement played on the intercom. Starting from 8 p.m., please lock all Geminis in their rooms. It is upon us. Elle froze up, her eyes widening. Until that moment, she had been unusually quiet, the two of us sitting cross-legged on the floor eating Chinese food. But I thought she was just tired from classes. Elle didn't react to the message at first. She sent me a sleepy smile, and then told me she was going to grab beer from the kitchen. What I didn't expect was for her to come back wielding one of her mom's butcher knives. I stepped back, but her eyes terrified me, her entire body trembling, fingers tightening around the handle. Her expression contorted with that same feral fear I couldn't understand. Elle, I bit back a cry. Hey. It's me. It's Smith. Get out, she spoke through a sob. Her ponytail swung around when she twisted to the door. Please. I don't want to hurt you, she waved the knife manically, and I raised my arms, my heart catapulting into my throat. You have 15 minutes, the voice drawled, and Elle's expression hardened. I repeat. Please lock all Geminis inside their rooms immediately and find a safe place. This warning will expire at 5 a.m. 8 hours from now. A sudden bang outside set off my fight or flight, doors slamming and running footsteps. I found my eyes glued to the blade in my best friend's hand. They were fucking serious about this. The dean really had turned a whole campus of students against one singular star sign. Elle's frightened eyes found me, and I lowered my arms. "Are you going to stab me?" I took a slow step back towards the door. Because I was born in May. I couldn't resist a laugh. "You told me you didn't care about the zodiac. You said all of this was BS. So, why now?" Another step, and she squeaked. "Do you want to fit in, Elle? Is this like peer pressure?" She didn't respond, and that pissed me off even more. Elle didn't know why she was afraid of me, because her head had been filled with crap. I raised my arms in mock surrender. "Why are you looking at me like that? Elle, I'm not going to hurt you. When have I ever?" I didn't expect to cry, but my eyes were stinging. I could hear screaming, Geminis being attacked and locked up. I risked a step back, and her grip on the knife changed, like she was ready to use it. "You are brainwashed," I said slowly. "The dean wants you to be scared. She's crazy, Elle. Like, delusional. She has some crazy vendetta against Geminis, and she's punishing us." Elle choked out a cry. "Last month," she spoke through a sob. "One of you got into my room." Elle shook her head rapidly, squeezing her eyes shut. "Just leave," she squeaked. "I'm sorry, Smith. I'll explain, I promise. But you need to find someplace else. It can't be here." She smiled, but her lips were strained, eyes wide. When I moved to try and reassure her, she jumped back, like a deer caught in headlights. She was terrified of me. "Lock yourself up," my friend said softly, and I realized I had lost her. "But don't hurt yourself." Elle sniffled. "They can climb through the windows and sense light. They follow it. So make sure to turn them off and stay down." Her expression darkened. "Can you promise me something?" I found myself nodding dizzily. Elle squeezed her eyes shut. "Don't look up." My gut twisted into tangled knots. "What?" Elle's words set something off inside me, but she was already dropping the knife and grabbing me gently, pushing me through the door. I was being shoved out onto the hallway, my bags thrown in my face, when the alarms started blaring, red lights swarming the hallways. I saw shadows darting in and out of rooms, others being shoved inside, while retreating figures made for the elevators. A boy was violently dragged out by a girl, and thrown on his ass. At that moment, I stopped seeing students. Kids. I was seeing wild animals crawling backwards on their hands and knees, frightened eyes darting for a safe getaway. A girl ran into me, dropping onto her knees, before catapulting into a sprint. She was caught by 3 guys who dragged her away, kicking and screaming. I had no choice. It was 7:50 when I found myself standing in front of the old building, halfway across campus, the alarm still ringing in my ears. The dorm was more of a boarding house, with maybe 2 or 3 floors. The night felt eerily still, a half-moon poking from the clouds. There was something glued to the front of the door, a simple white sheet of paper. On it, scrawled in permanent marker, was "NO" in bold letters. The O was crossed, I noticed. Which was familiar. 5 minutes, the intercom screeched, and in my panic, I knocked 3 times. "Hello?" I banged again. "Hey, can someone let me in?" I swallowed thickly. My star sign tangled in my throat when there was a crash behind me, and I twisted around. A group of students were dragging 2 others, bound and gagged, hauling them into a car trunk. With my stomach trying to projectile into my throat, I turned to knock again, finding my fists meeting something warm. There was a shadow standing in the doorway, warm golden light bleeding around him. I could barely see his face, only a mop of light reddish curls. He tugged the paper off of the door and held it out. The handwriting stuck out. "No means no," he said, and moved to slam the door. I forced my heel in the way, blocking him. He tried to shut the door on my foot, and in my panic, I shoved it back in his face. He didn't try again, but I made sure to not let my guard down. "You told the dean about me?" I hissed out. "I'm sorry, did we go back to 6th grade?" He made a snorting noise. "Well, look who's talking." "What?" The shadow paused, before stepping out into the light. I glimpsed narrowed eyes and freckles. I made a move to shove past him, but he stood stubbornly in the way. His eyes were shaded by a scuffed pair of Ray-Bans. "Ah, yes, the traitor," he said, who was hiding in Sagittarius and didn't think we would notice. He gestured behind him, and something jingled. Looking closer, there was something metal attached to his wrist. "We turned your room into a panic room, by the way," he deadpanned. "So, like I said," the guy pointed to the stupid sign. "No means no." His lips formed a spiteful smile, and behind me, another crash. Something ice-cold ran down my spine. I couldn't bring myself to turn, to see more brutality. The guy had visibly stiffened up, nose flaring. He hiked his glasses up his nose, revealing eyes shadowed by an eerie glow slowly spreading across his pupil. His gaze followed mine. Another kid was being mercilessly dragged across the parking lot. When I turned back to the guy, his expression had darkened. He slid his glasses back into place with emphasis. "Have fun locking yourself up," he said, saluting me with 2 fingers before stepping back. Another jingle, and he flinched. This time I saw it clearly, a rusted chain wrapped around his ankle and right wrist. The guy noticed me staring, lips curling into a scowl. He stepped behind the door, clearly embarrassed. "This is your 2-minute warning," the intercom was still loud, even halfway across the grounds. Hearing the announcement, the kid gently kicked my foot out of the way, and I almost fell on my ass. "Goodbye," was all he said dryly, and slammed the door a little too hard in my face. I could hear voices when I was shuffling back. I checked my phone. 7:58. Fuck. Across campus, the warning lights were still flashing. "Why did you do that?" Another guy's voice hissed from behind the door. "Because she's a traitor." "Yeah, but she's stuck out there," a girl joined in. "Aren't you being a little too harsh?" "Nope." I left them to argue, making it back onto campus. 7:59. Bathroom. That was all I could think of. I started toward the main building, when movement flashed in the corner of my eye. I saw them pouring from campus, illuminated in brilliant orange from the torches in their hands. Leos. I recognized several faces from my class. They moved as one, a large group heading across campus toward the clearing in the woods. They wore pajamas, normal clothes, like they were going to hang out. But something in the air and prickling across my skin told me different. There were exclusive clubs on campus, but this was a whole other level. I ducked, mapping a way to get on campus without being caught. If I could get to the door and make a clean break through the cafeteria, I could dive into the girls' bathroom next to the elevator. I dropped to my knees in an attempt to crawl, when I saw her. The bright red hair was a giveaway, her bobbing ponytail frenzied as she joined the others. L. Another frantic look at my phone. 8:02. I didn't expect her to see me. She was looking around frantically, unlike the others whose eyes were set forward. It looked like she was looking for a way out, staggering over uneven ground. Then her eyes found mine. Initially, Elle looked relieved, and then her gaze went to the sky, flicking back to me, her eyes widening. She hesitated, before stumbling over to me, pulling something from her jeans pocket. It was a much sharper knife, the blade glinting under moonlight cast across the grounds. "Tell me your name," she said in a squeak. "I need to know it's you." I had half a mind to question her, before I remembered the Gemini boy chained up. "Smith," I gasped out. I'm Smith." Elle hesitated. She twisted around, scanning the night, and turned back to me. Her frenzied eyes searched mine. "What is my most embarrassing story?" "What?" In 2 single strides, she was holding the knife to my throat, her hand trembling. The steel was cold, and I had no doubt that she wouldn't press deeper. "Say it, Smith." Word for word. Behind her, the Leos were gone, with some stragglers left behind. I nodded slowly, trying to ignore the blade digging into my skin. This was my new normal. You had your period in your boyfriend's parents' new car," I whispered. "You still have nightmares." Her expression crumpled with relief, and she dropped the knife. "How about mine?" I urged her. Elle surprised me with a quiet laugh. "You barfed tacos all over your crush on your first date," she choked out. "And he never talked to you again." I started to speak, and Elle tugged off her jacket, wrapping it around my eyes. At first, I fought back, before her hands, and then her fingernails dug into the bare flesh of my arms. Her touch was reassuring, dragging up my arms and then grasping hold of my shoulders. "I told you not to look up," her voice came out in an annoyed hiss. I didn't. I bit back a cry when she dug her nails in further. "What's happening?" "I'll explain later." "How can you guys tell who are Gemini?" I whispered. "I don't get it." Elle didn't respond for a moment. "Your eyes," she whimpered. "It's in your eyes." "What do you mean by that?" "Shush," Elle muttered. "Just stay quiet, okay?" Elle pulled me to my feet, and I staggered blindly, trying to balance myself. "I'll take you to a bathroom," she breathed, shoving me forward. "But if you tell anyone I helped you." "I won't." I tripped over something, almost falling on my face. The further we were getting, I could sense something, light. It started as a pinprick behind my eyes, before spreading, bleeding light fraying through the material of Elle's jacket. There was one bright splodge of light, and then another, and another. Speckled illuminations like glitter illuminating the night. "Closer," they told me. I followed them almost giddily, watching them burn through Elle's jacket. When the sound of thundering footsteps sliced into me, I turned my head, trying to sense where it was coming from. "What's that?" I didn't realize I was laughing, until manic giggles spurted from my lips. It was like being high, my thoughts bleeding into cotton candy. Suddenly, all I wanted was to see the lights. They felt so far away, and yet also like I could reach them, plucking them straight out of the sky. I laughed again, my body a puppet as I reached out and tried to catch them in my palm. I said, "Be quiet." Elle whisper shrieked. I am. I was curious about the light. It was so bright, and I was missing out on fully taking it in. I stumbled again, this time my footsteps tangled. I didn't hear the voice until it was in my head, a whisper telling me to pull away the blindfold. It was choking me, suffocating my thoughts and filling me with a taste of her. I saw it, just a glimpse dancing across my peripheral. I had my fingers clawing into Elle's jacket, ready to rip it off, when someone else did it for me. Leo. What are you doing out here? The voice was familiar, but it was being drowned out by its light. Its song. I'm locking her up, Elle said shakily. Darkness made way for light, and I blinked rapidly. I could sense my head tipping back, and then Elle's fingers in my hair, trying to shove my head down. Blinking rapidly, I saw the dean of the college, and my best friend's pale face. And then I saw the stampede suffocated in shadow, silhouettes passing me, ethereal light illuminating otherwise vacant eyes. The lights resembled stars themselves, dancing through the night. It was the same light that was seeping into me. It felt cozy and warm, already ignited inside them. I could tell who they were from the attempt to lock themselves up. I glimpsed handcuffs around wrists, makeshift ropes still clinging to arms and ankles, duct tape over mouths. When my gaze followed the horde, I caught sight of a cuffed ankle, a stray chain trailing behind him. The guy who locked me out. He moved slowly, like a zombie. His glasses were awkwardly placed on the top of his head, eyes drowned by that light. It was teasing me, seeping into me like honey. But it wasn't moonlight. I could glimpse the crescent glowing under the clouds. Geminis. They were bathed in it, a swimming glow I wanted to dive into. All of them. Where were they going? Unlike the Leos, their expressions were blank as they staggered along, akin to a crowd of zombies. I remember not being able to concentrate on the Geminis. Because something had hold of me, and wasn't letting go. I felt it reach directly into the back of my head, phantom fingers taking me into its grasp. I didn't mean to look up. I tight-poked my head back, drinking in the sky above me, and the night, that suddenly felt alive. The Gemini horde stopped suddenly, heads tipping back, glowing eyes following suit. I blinked twice. Elle was already covering my eyes, and I wrenched her hands away so I could see, clearly. I could feel it, sense it, consuming me, filling my thoughts with a lulling fog. Smith. Elle's eyes found mine, and she dropped to her knees. Like she was scared of me. I remember her lips had formed the words in breathy sobs. Don't look. Before she could reach up, I blinked again, and this time it was a longer one. I started toward something. It was there. I just had to reach as high as I could. Then I would be able to touch it. Starry eyes surrounded me, but I don't remember being scared. Elle's cry rattled in my skull as I felt my body lurch on its own, driven by something else, a sentient thing inside me. I could feel my mind filling with fog. It told me to go to sleep, and I did. When I came to, it was no longer night, artificial white light buzzing above me. The first thing I felt was something wet oozing down my chin. Then, cool porcelain pressed against my cheek. I was in a bathroom stall, my head stuck down a toilet bowl. But it was different to waking up hungover. I felt filthy. My body was aching, a striking pain rippling across the back of my head. When I lifted my neck slightly, a snapping sound made me jump, like my bones were popping back into place. My memory was gone, my thoughts a whirlwind lost to the dark. I could still see Elle's face illuminated in that startling light. The shadowy horde around me, starry eyes burning into me. Then there was nothing. The familiar ice-cold grays of porcelain greeted me when I pried my eyes open. There was something in my mouth, and spat it out, expecting stale barf. What I wasn't expecting was a wet piece of flesh to splash down into the bowl. It took me several seconds to realize the toilet bowl I had my head down was not empty. In the flickering light from the broken light fixture above me, I saw the glistening red first, spattered on the lid, and when I looked down, on the floor too, staining my knees. And then I saw all of it. The bulging, slimy red mess sticking from the bowl. I lurched back, and something was stuck at the back of my throat. I reached into my mouth, cringing, and pulled out what looked like a mauled finger, skinned of flesh. There was only spiky pieces of bone fragments clinging to shredded muscle. Something inhuman croaked from my lips, and I slammed my hands over my mouth, my gut twisting. I looked up. Red. I looked down. More red. Vivid, and wet, and recent. I was covered in dirt and grass stains, my legs bloodied and bruised, half of my hair ripped out. The walls around me were the same shade, glistening, pooling, disgusting red, dripping and staining every surface. The lumpy red mass sticking from the toilet bowl suddenly looked less like a mass, the more I was looking at it, blinking through blinding light. At some point, I screamed, heaving up the rest, wet globules of fat spilling from my mouth. There was a head in the toilet bowl, stuck right under, like I had been trying to hide the evidence. The head didn't look like a head, half of its skull crushed. But I could still make out familiar features. Eyes still wide open, lips frozen in what looked like a scream. The rest of her had presumably been flushed, but I could still see pieces of her clinging to the rim of the toilet. Elle. Oh God, fuck, I killed my best friend. I'm still sitting here. I can't bring myself to move. Normal college life still goes on outside, and I can't understand how. I ask this as a Gemini. Preferably on campus, but this goes for all of you. Did any of you kill and eat someone last night with no memory of doing so? I'm starting to think the Gemini constellation is something more than a group of stars after all. I think it's alive. Third story. This story was shared by you/UniverseMasterongram. Wendigo Encounter. By the way, I have posted this here again as it was on my Alt-ACC by accident. This is my first post here, but please read all the way through. This is a real telling of what happened while I was on a cabin trip. Also, I'm on mobile, so sorry for bad formatting. A little backstory. I was 13 at the time, and I come from a family of native Dant, and we believe in many things similar to the Wendigo and Skinwalker, like La Llorona, the Whistling Woman and alike. We also have what some call spiritual gifts that allow us to see evil spirits and negative energy. These gifts are what allow us to see these creatures and spirits, as well as being able to have a connection to God and His angels. We had been wanting to go on another camping trip for ages, and after some debate due to some of my nephews catching a bad cold, it was finally arranged. After arriving at the site, it was as normal than any other trip for the most part. Except there was matte signs of bad luck, a terrible omen, dead birds on the drive, my 7Y brother almost falling outside of our moving car due to a lock malfunction, and during the last few days of the 2-week vacation strange things started happening. Food, drawers, cabinets, doors would be open and random chairs/Tupperware would be missing. But we chalked it up to some rowdy teenagers at the other campsite. Though, we all knew it wasn't just some kids, this was some far more treacherous, but no one wanted to admit that it wasn't as simple as wandering animals or some thieving people. Until some days later when even stranger things started to occur. Like, hearing footsteps behind us stopping one step after we did, the feeling of being watched, and a strong rancid odor when being completely alone. Imagine feces mixed with hot rotting meat and then thrown into a fire. Although these occurrences were a disturbance, it did not deter us from staying for the final 2 days as we had been planning it for months, but one experience years ago on the day right before our departure still haunts me to this day. I had been strolling through the forest while looking firewood when I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. As this happened, it seemed that all life ceased around me because I could only hear my heartbeat and the lone heavy footsteps approaching me. Then I heard my name called from what seemed every direction, yet echoed from in front of me while also coming from behind. The voice calling me was a harsh, raspy, animalistic in-tone imitation of my sister's voice, who had just recently left the trip due to stress only a few hours ago. This had sent horrendous chills down my spine, so I ran the fastest I've ever had back towards the campsite, while I heard the twigs and leaves crunching behind me. I had finally reached the campsite when the footsteps suddenly stopped. I was relieved and slumped over to the cabin stairs when I slipped on a rock slipping out of the makeshift fire. It had caused me to head straight into it. The blazing force of nature had almost burned my face when I was just stopped mid-fall. I hadn't gained my balance, it was just as if someone was hanging on to me and pulled me back. I'm not sure what it was, but my family suggests that it was my guardian angel saving me from an early death, but after that experience I have never been to the same campsite ever again, and didn't go camping for a few years after that. Still, what really scares me the most from back then was when we had been leaving the site. I looked back from the car window and saw a figure standing at the tree line staring at me. It was lanky and looked starved to the point of having its skin wrapping tightly against its bones. But when I looked onto the pathway, the footprints were completely gone, and as I blinked we rounded the corner and it seemingly vanished into thin air. This has left me questioning what is those woods and was it a reality, but when my sister asked me why I was so shaken, I told her what I experienced and her face went pale. She had told me that before leaving a terrifically gaunt figure had been watching us across the river bank, and that it had noticed her and ran away on all four at a fictional speed, she shakily said, staying quite frightened after. Until speaking with a phrase that still haunts me today, before I had left early, that thing had left long, deep, scratch mark on the trail sign. It was the one that it was chased me on. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/A Blue Sweater. How my father survived an encounter with a Wendigo. All know the feeling of hunger, and yet some have never seen it. You yourself may have claimed to be starving, empty, famished, or hungry. But have you yourself ever encountered the merciless beast we call hunger? Have you ever considered that the thing you call starving is only the fingernail of the monster that plagues the minds and souls of the innocent and sane? Breathing down your neck and clawing at your skin with blood-covered nails, desperate to get inside, only blocked from you gobbling down cheeseburgers, pizza, donuts, fruits, and veggies. And yet some have come close to hunger. Some of the worst instances of mass hunger, known as famines, have plagued us for centuries. Ireland 1845, Russia 1921, China 1959. And yet even in these stages of hunger, when people's teeth were gnawed and broken from eating leather and dirt, and animals had a feast of the bones and rotten flesh of human remains, very few have ever seen hunger, few have seen the Wendigo. All the Wendigo ever feels is hunger, for it is hunger. You may have heard of the Wendigo, seen drawings of it. But for the few who have seen it, for most it was the last thing they ever saw. I haven't seen it, no, thank God I haven't seen it, yet the blood that runs in my family have seen it, stared at it in its hollow eyes. This is not my story, this is my father's. When I was around the age of 15, he told me to sit down next to him, pointing to the brown cloth chair. I was old enough to know, he told me, why he never lets me set foot in the woods, why we never go up north, especially never when it's winter. I recorded it all, he requested for that, wanted a record of what happened to him, to make sure no one else went through it like he did. This is what he told me. Father's story. He takes out a cigarette and clicks a lighter until a small blaze, and puts the small flame to his cigarette, taking a puff before starting. My uncle decided it was time for me to visit the Great Lakes forests, told me the woods were some of the most beautiful in the whole country. It took a lot of convincing until your grandfather decided it was fine for me to visit the north. Of course, when he made the decision, it was winter by then. The winter down here is a light breeze compared to the freeze up in the north. Cold days, and dark icy nights. It's a wonder how the Native Americans managed to survive months of thick snow, and the creatures that came with it. He pauses to take another puff of his cigarette before continuing. This didn't stop my uncle, who had prepared in case we had to go during the winter. He for both me and him as if we were going to the Arctic, thick puffy jackets, fat boots, and gloves as well as goggles in case we came upon a storm on a walk, as well as bear spray if we came across wild animals. He also packed something else, a .50 Action Express Desert Eagle, the ones those cops use in the movies. He didn't actually expect to use it, it was just in case we came across a bear or lynx, and things got close and personal. He pauses and stares at his right leg. He definitely didn't think we needed it for something different. It was around mid-November when we took the plane to the state of Michigan. He had purchased a standard hotel room in a small town, he refused to mention its name, and we spent the most few days simply getting used to the sceneries of where we were. My uncle was right, it was beautiful, actually, I don't even think the word beautiful cuts it. I could see the edge of the forest by my window, they were tall, like long hairs protruding from the head of Mother Nature. And along those hairs lied the fleas. Squirrels, chipmunks, birds, and the occasional wolf and fox would pass by, before despairing in the shadow of the trees. I'll tell you, even now I do miss seeing the trees, watching the wind blow the tall pines in harmony. He sighs, and puts out his cigarette on his wooden chair. But I know I can never go back there. Almost every day we went on hikes, with the snow crunching beneath our feet, stopping every so often to witness the wildlife. Once or twice we came across a bear. I was scared of course, but my uncle had faced plenty in his time living there, so of course he knew what to do. Don't look them in the eyes, he would whisper to me, as he pulled out his bear spray, just in case. And eventually, it would move along, searching for some berries to eat. It was around our second week there when my uncle decided to take me on my first night walk. So, we put on our coats, snow boots, and brought along the desert spray and Desert Eagle. It was somehow even more gorgeous in the dark than it was in the day, the stars flowed above us like fireflies welcoming us to the forest, as the moon as big and bright as ever hovered above us. We walked until we came upon a fork in the path. We usually would go left, as it much longer so we could experience the forest longer, but it was a lot colder than usual, so my uncle decided it was best to get back sooner rather than later. For some reason, the colder weather did hang in my mind for longer than it should have. Although the weather could be unpredictable, the weather news where I was more accurate than the ones down in the north. This thought swept my mind eventually, reasoning that every news channel got it wrong eventually. So we continued, but as we went it just kept getting colder and colder. By this point, my uncle repeatedly kept looking up at the sky, with a bewildered look on his face. Looking up I saw not a single cloud in the sky, nothing to indicate a snowstorm was coming, or anything that would cause the weather to get this cold. Soon my uncle put me close to him, to make us warmer. It wasn't a long hike back, just a mile or more. Then it was clear something was wrong, more than the weather. As we kept walking, fast steps. My uncle jerked his head in that direction, instinctively pulling out his bear spray. Looking past him, I could clearly see several pairs of eyes in the shadow of the trees, moving fast, moving toward us. My uncle had quickly raised the bear spray and put himself in front of me, screaming to get packed. Looking over, I could now clearly see it was a wolf, mouths open, panting and stamping its feet on the ground, creating loud cracks as the snow fell beneath them. Looking up, Uncle had his finger straight on the bear spray trigger, ready to blast them straight in the shouted faces. Then the wolves ran right past us, right past us. They were maybe 10 feet away from us at most, moving so fast I could feel a small gust of wind push against my face. My uncle put down the bear spray, and looked around Dusty, in complete utter confusion encompassing his whole face. That's when I saw more eyes. He motions his hand in a circle around him. There had to be dozens of critters and birds. Running, they didn't even stop to look at us, they were just running. All the animals I had feared, all the critters and birds, and all sorts of things in the woods I had stared at in amazement just days before. All of them were running. I had never seen anything like it in my life, nor did my uncle. He decided that it was time to go, most likely because whatever the animals were running from was something that we didn't want to come across. Now my uncle was someone that doesn't get scared easily. From the stories your grandfather told me, he had faced death more times than he could count, coming across an angry grizzly, a hungry pack of wolves, and even someone pointing a gun at him straight in the face. Even then, I didn't see fear in his face, but looking into his eyes, I could see worry, and that was enough I needed to know. Our standard walk had turned into a jog, with Uncle deciding that it would be fast to go off trail through the woods. On the trail, there was a clear opening overhead for the light of the moon and stars to shine through, but off trail, the pine needles blocked most of the light that came through, with small beams piercing the thick hide here and there. My uncle just kept walking straight towards the town. He probably just had half a mile left when he suddenly stopped, making me bump into his back. He didn't move, didn't even make a kind, almost like he had stopped breathing. "Uncle?" I asked in a squally voice. I looked ahead of him, my heart pounding against my sternum as it pumped blood like a bicycle pump. Up ahead was the outline of a person, though it was too far away to see any facial features or any features at all. It was, I don't know, 30 seconds before my uncle started backing up, gesturing me to do the same. "Hello, can we help you?" I heard a tremble. It was a small one, but it was enough to tell me everything I needed to know. My uncle, one of the coolest people I've ever known, was scared. Slowly, ever so slowly, my uncle put his hand behind his back, moving towards the bear spray. But my eyes nearly popped out when his hand went past the bear spray and moved toward the gun. Crack. Up ahead I heard what sounded like a small twig break, and breaking eye contact with my uncle's hand looked forward back at the figure. He had taken a step forward, stepping on a small branch that poked out of the layer of snow. And with that step, there was a new feeling in the air. It wasn't the cold, it wasn't fear, it was hunger. An almost lustful amount of hunger. "Look," my uncle said, as his hand still gradually moved towards the desert eagle, "we don't want any trouble, we're just trying to get back to town, so if you could please," he didn't get to finish his sentence. By this point my father stopped looking at me, instead looking out the window. It all happened too fast. First, there were the steps, fast, rampant, each step came with a snarl. It was too fast for my uncle, too fast for me to process. What came next was the gunshot. It rang off the trees, bouncing back into my ears, making them ring like a church bell. He got one shot off before it got to us, one shot off, before it made him scream. It slammed into him, flinging both me and his gun to the left, slamming me on the ground with a loud thud which knocked the wind right out of me. Oh God, the screams. It didn't kill him quickly, I didn't see it happen, but I heard the crunch of teeth going through flesh and meeting bone. It probably stopped there for a second, to savor the taste of the blood against its rotten teeth, before it continued. I'm glad I didn't see it happen, but I could well damn hear it. Splish and splash, as blood poured on the ground, as it continued to sink its teeth into his flesh, seemingly hard for it to hold back. It had enough of the taste, now it wanted to eat. Crunch after crunch came, followed by tearing and popping sounds. I think it was pulling the organs out of his stomach. Don't know how long I had my eyes closed, but I opened them, I was facing away from them, and looking at a light that bounced off a silver object. The desert eagle. I stood, up still shaken from the fall. The funny thing was I wasn't scared, my brain must have taken a hit, making it difficult for me to process what was happening behind me. I took a casual step forward, towards the gun, cracking the show beneath my feet. And that's when the crunching stopped. That's when I remembered where I was. We both turned around at the same time, its eyes meet mine, and my eyes meet it, if you could call them eyes. I say this because I don't even know if they were eyes. They were black and hollow and black. I say black because all there was in those eyes was black. Then there was the rest of its body. I couldn't believe the thing that did that to my uncle was unbelievably skinny. Its ribs poked out of its chest, bones clearly seen through its slender arms and legs. There were antlers that looked like that of a deer, protruding from its head. He pauses and thinks for a moment. No. It wasn't a head. It was his skull. 'Cause that's what it looked like, a skull with deer antlers coming from the top of its head. And even as it crouched I could see it was tall, even towering over me in that stance. He both stared at each other for what felt like hours before it turned back around and continued eating what was left of my uncle. Did it even care that I was there? Why didn't it just attack me next, just get it over with? I didn't stop to ask these questions, I just turned, picked up the gun, and ran. For a second I considered taking a shot, but I didn't know if the bullet my uncle shot at it hit it. If it did, then I don't even think bullets affected this thing. All I knew was I had to get away. So I kept running, and running, and running. What probably took just 10 minutes felt like an eternity. And then I saw the lights of the town. I'm gonna make it. I thought, hope creeping up my spine and into my brain. And that's when I heard the distant footsteps. I turned around for a split second and felt that hope come crashing down all the way to my toes. There it was, probably just 1,000 meters away. I could see its eyes, they weren't glowing or anything, they were just so black they stood out even in the darkness. And it was running, running fast. I couldn't believe my eyes how fast this thing was running. I would bet all the money I have this thing could easily beat a gazelle high on cocaine. I turned my head back around and continued running, putting all my strength and energy into my legs to just get away from this thing. But the steps just kept getting closer and closer. Now today I understand why it didn't eat me before. Because it knew that no matter how much I tried to run, it would never fail to catch me. And it did. A jolt of pain tore through my entire leg when it clamped its teeth into my leg, the teeth reaching my femur and making a small crack in it. This thing had unimaginable strength to pick me up in its mouth and flung me several dozen feet. I landed head first, shock and pain staring at my head, spreading throughout my entire body, but soon the pain was going away, as I felt myself slipping away out of consciousness. In the background, I heard it crunching, savoring the little bit of meat it got out of my leg. This is it. This is how I'm going to die. I believed it, I truly believed it. But then I heard it. Get up. It was my uncle. You aren't going down that easy, are you? The words were all I needed. Every emotion in my body. Hopelessness, fear, sadness, despair. We're all replaced by one, rage. I turned around and pointed the gun which I managed to keep a hold of and pinter it straight at its face. It turned, seemingly shocked that I had a weapon in my hand, but soon after, it charged. I wasn't aiming for anything, just pulled the trigger. Almost seemingly in slow motion. I saw the bullet fly, and go straight into the void that was its eyes. Time stopped for just a second. Then it stumbled backward, grabbing its face, and I heard it scream. For the first time in the recording, I saw fear flicker in my father's eyes, and then he continues. When I saw it open its mouth, I expected a monstrous bellow, or a loud shriek. But what came out was worse. It wasn't the sound of a monster, but the sound of a people. Hundreds of people. Men and women screaming in pain and agony. The elderly shrieked in terror. I could hear babies crying, and toddlers screaming as if they were denied a toy. But one scream remains in my mind forever, the only reason I can't ever forget what happened that day. Because I heard a specific scream come out of its mouth. The scream of my uncle. The rage was gone, and the terror returned. I got back up and continued running towards the light. I didn't want to get away from it, I just wanted to get away from the horrible screaming. But I couldn't, I just couldn't. No matter how fast I ran, the dream stayed the same. But then it changed, for it was no longer screaming of pain, but screams of rage. I continued running, I had to get away, I wanted to, I needed to. My femur's crack was continuing to grow as I continued running, my lungs pressed against my rib cage as my body demanded a huge amount of oxygen that the lungs could not provide. I remember bursting through the woods, welcomed by the bright street lamps, and the hard pavement beneath my boots. And when I had burst through out of the woods, my body had used up all its strength and I fell. The last memory I got before blacking out was the screech of tires, a man looking over me on the phone, and before I lost consciousness, I turned my head and turned toward the woods. I saw it, standing there, one eye closed, the other empty eye staring at my own. I didn't need to see its face to know what it felt. It was angry, it hated me, and it was still hungry. I woke up the next day in the town's hospital. By that time I had been out for 3 days, and your grandfather had flown over after he heard the news. I was greeted with his tears and his warm hug after he saw me awake. I told him and everyone else everything, about the thing, about Uncle, everything. They didn't believe me, probably thought the number of hits I took on my head made me reimagine a little old bear as a monster. They did send out a search party, however, didn't find it, but found my uncle. The rumors spread how every bit of flesh, blood, organ, and even the bone marrow was stripped clean, and all that was left was a clutter of bones. He sighs. That Wendigo is probably still out there, continuing to eat innocent people, continuing to hate me for being the one that got away. And there's more out there, more that will not stop until they are full, and they are never full, and never will be. He pauses. The most disturbing thought I have is that of my uncle's voice in my head when that Wendigo had me on the ground. Sometimes I think, was it actually my uncle's voice telling me to get up? Or was it that thing, telling me to get up, wanting me to put up a little more fight, so it could make the kill so much better? Fifth story. This story was shared by u/JLGlaPhysics. My college roommate kept a dark secret. When I was in college, I lived in a modest apartment just out of town. Given that I was trying to put myself through college, I had to save as much money as I could on rent. So, I moved in with 2 other roommates who were attending the same university I was. It had 3 bedrooms, which I was thankful for. I really didn't want to be subjected to anyone's nighttime snoring or anything else a college kid would get up to at night. Colin was a finance major, had ginger hair, and enjoyed playing 2K into all hours of the night. He'd wasted no time setting up his PlayStation in the living room before even unpacking any of his stuff. Ken was in his sophomore year studying linguistics. He was a quiet guy, kept to himself mostly. Only ever came out of his room to go to classes or pour himself a bowl of cereal. Most of the time, though, he was just out of the apartment. And then there was me, Tyler. I was studying psychology with the vague goal of working in academia to carry out important research. I was sure I would figure the specifics out along the way. Colin and I had managed to get Ken to join us for drinks a couple of times, even got him out to a house party once. Whatever his scene was, partying certainly was not it. While Colin was knocking them back with the best of them, Ken was conservatively nursing a Bud Light, grimacing at every sip. I kind of felt sorry for the guy. I guess he had his own circle of friends since he was always out of the house so much. I certainly hadn't seen or met any of them, though. Ken could be very reserved and standoffish a lot of the time. Even when talking to him he could be very distant, as if his mind was in some far-off place. If you didn't know the guy, you might even think he was a bit of a dick. He really wasn't, though. All 3 of us got along pretty well. No roommate spats or drama like some of my other friends on campus would lament about. I was tutoring high school math alongside college, so I was happy that my roommates didn't add an extra level of stress on top of that. After about a year and a half of living together, Ken died. A car accident, we were told. Ken was, apparently, taking a cab out of the city late one night when a drunk driver veered out of the oncoming lane and crashed into them, head-on collision. Ken and the cab driver had both died instantly. Ken had been sitting in the front passenger seat, according to the police report. The drunk driver succumbed to his injuries in the hospital some 12 hours later. I found out about the accident when I answered a phone call from a sniffling Colin the morning after the crash. It was obvious that he had been crying on the other end of the line. I wasn't as affected by Ken's death. Don't get me wrong, I liked the guy and I was sad, but it's not like we were all that close. Plus, I suppose I'm more one to bottle up my feelings when it comes to grief. Ken's parents arrived the following week to clear out his stuff. His father introduced himself with a stoic, while somewhat pained, delivery. I had met Ken's mother only once before when she helped him move in. Today, she seemed a much smaller woman, as if beaten down by the world, obvious bereavement behind her eyes. When they opened the door to his room, Ken's mom became hysterical. Deep, wallowing sobs echoed as she cupped her face. Colin suggested that he and I pack up Ken's belongings to make it easier on the grieving parents. They would only have to take the boxes and leave. About 10 minutes into packing, Ken's father joined us. Every now and then we could hear soft whimpers coming from the other room. Almost done packing, we had gotten everything into a box and into the moving van except Ken's computer. We tried stowing the ultra-wide monitor earlier, but we just couldn't find a box big enough. "You guys can keep that," said Ken's dad, nodding over to the computer monitor. Colin and I looked at each other awkwardly. "Oh no, Mr. McTavish," Colin began to say, "we couldn't possibly dash. It's fine. Really. We have no use for it anyway," Mr. McTavish stated flatly, staring out of Ken's bedroom window. We escorted the McTavishes to their U-Haul, watched them pull out onto the road, and drive off. "So what do you want to do with the computer?" I asked Colin when we got back inside. "I guess we could sell it." Colin shrugged. "I really don't feel comfortable holding onto the thing." "Same," I agreed. Colin and I were both apprehensive about going into Ken's computer to wipe the hard drive, so we tossed a coin to see who would have to do it. I lost. Now, I've never claimed I could hack into the Pentagon or anything, but I was pretty sure I could figure out how to wipe a hard drive. When I tried to, however, an error message came up. This action could not be performed because the following program or folder is currently open. Taxi Vipers. I was puzzled. There were no folders or applications open, much less one called Taxi Vipers. Again, I'm not the most tech-savvy person out there, so I went to get Colin. Colin did exactly what I did and was met with the same error message. He then opened up Task Manager, unable to find any program by that name that was running. He fiddled with a few more tabs and menus for a while, but that also bore no fruit. Finally, he did a search on the C drive for the term, Taxi Vipers. A folder came up. "Wait. Don't open it," I said, not wanting to invade our dead roommate's privacy like that. "Just delete the folder or something." Colin nodded understandingly. He went to delete the folder, but an error message came up again. This action could not be performed because the following program or folder is currently open. Taxi Vipers. God damn it, Colin swore. How the fuck is it open? So what now? I asked cluelessly. Thinking. Colin tapped his finger on Ken's study desk. Then he opened the folder. There were 5 video files in the folder, each titled with 6-digit numbers. Colin looked over at me, wondering what to do next. I don't want to see the guy's porn or whatever it is, man, I stated, not even joking. Look, me neither, okay, Colin assured me. But something in this folder is either corrupted or glitched or, I don't know. If we can open a couple of files, we might find the one that's causing the issue. He said, hovering the cursor over the video file at the top of the page. I didn't like it, but I guess he had a point. He took my silence as confirmation and clicked on the video. The video opened up a grainy feed. A young woman was sitting by a table in what looked like one of those interrogation rooms you'd see in a cop show. The woman had long brown hair and was probably around my age. The walls were painted white and you could see a fraction of a gray door behind her just in the corner of the camera's view. The door opened and a man walked in. His face was out of frame, but he was wearing a white lab coat. He moved out of frame, but the woman's gaze followed him. When the man had stopped moving, the woman was looking into the camera, indicating that the man was standing right behind it. The woman looked uneasy but not scared. Moments later, another man walked in, also wearing a lab coat. He was holding a clipboard. He sat in the chair across the table from the woman and placed the clipboard down. Colin and I turned away from the screen to look at each other in shock. The man with the clipboard, it was Ken. His hair was shorter, but it was definitely him. "Good morning, madam," said the voice from behind the camera. "I am Dr. Fisher. For the recording, please state your name." His tone was cold and clinical. Madeline. "Madeline Parker," the woman said warily. While the woman spoke, Ken started writing on a page in the clipboard. "Tell me, Madeline," Dr. Fisher asked, "do you believe in the paranormal?" "Yes," Madeline said, her fingertips tapping on the table nervously. Ken stood up and walked over to the woman's direction, then past her, out of frame. He reappeared shortly dragging cables and a large machine on wheels. The sound was muffled, but you could hear Ken speaking to Madeline and she began unbuttoning the top half of her blouse. Ken grabbed a few of the cables and placed 2 electrodes on her chest. He then connected the cables to the machine and turned it on. The display on the machine lit up, followed by a periodic beeping sound. "A heart rate monitor," Colin observed, never looking away from the computer screen. The camera lens made the light from the display flicker. On Madeline's head, Ken placed a cap, more than a dozen cables were extending from it. "Now, Miss Madeline," Fisher said, "do we have your permission to administer the test?" Madeline nodded. "For the recording, please, Miss Madeline," the voice of the doctor insisted. "Yes. You have my permission," Madeline stammered. "Beginning sonic exposure examination," Dr. Fisher announced. Ken retrieved a pair of large headphones and placed them over Madeline's ears, then walked back over to his side of the table. After a few seconds, Fisher spoke again. "Increased heart rate. Subject condition remains stable," he remarked. Ken scribbled in his clipboard. The beeping sound from the heart rate monitor was noticeably accelerating in pace. Every so often Ken would read the monitor and then write something down. Then Madeline let out a haunting shriek. "Stop! Make it stop!" she cried. She was trying to get up from her chair, but her movement was impaired somehow. Ken rose quickly to get to Madeline, but the doctor spoke first. "No, Kenneth," Dr. Fisher commanded. "She has already agreed to the study." Ken sat back down, obediently. Madeline's screams became louder and louder, her fingers dug into the armrests of her chair. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" she pleaded over and over. Then she suddenly went quiet. Her breathing was heavy and you could see her chest expand and flatten rapidly. "No! No, please! No! 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 No!" She began to blare again. She started writhing in her chair, then violently thrashing her arms and legs about, kicking off one of her heels. She managed to jolt herself out of her chair, ripping the cables out of the monitor, hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Madeline wasn't moving. Ken looked up at the camera, up at the doctor. "Get over there!" Fisher shouted. Ken ran over to Madeline and crouched down. And that's where the video ended. "Jesus Christ," Colin said, making me aware of his presence again. "That girl. Fuck, do you think she dash?" He couldn't finish the question. I dragged my palm down my face. I didn't know what to make of any of this. The girl. What were they doing to her? Who was this mysterious doctor? Why on earth was Ken involved? My head was spinning, Madeline's scream still fresh in my mind. I could sense her fear. No, I could understand her fear. A primal response brought on by something truly immeasurable in horror. But what? And that revolting sound of her face cracking onto the cold tiles. I felt warm bile rise in the back of my throat, the room around me twisted and gyrated. Involuntarily, I leaned over and spewed vomit all over Ken's carpet. Colin led me to the bathroom and hunched me over the toilet. More vomit came. I got in the shower, the cold water zapping me back into a state of quasi-lucidity. I held my face under the water, hoping it would wash away everything I had just experienced. Every time I closed my eyes, the images would come back. Her screams would resonate around my skull with stark clarity as if I were in that godforsaken chamber of terror. Colin was on his laptop in the kitchen when I came out of the bathroom. "I figured it out," he said, not even looking up at me. "Ken was taking linguistics, right?" I didn't say anything. "Taxi vipers," Colin said, "it's an anagram of expiravit." I shook my head obliviously. "That's Latin for ghost," he stated, looking at me now. I shuddered, remembering the doctor's question in the video. "Tell me, Madeline, do you believe in the paranormal?" "Oh, shit," Colin whispered, almost inaudibly. The accident. Ken was in a taxi when, his face ran pale at the realization. Gooseflesh traveled up my arms. I emailed myself the videos," Colin said, staring down into his lap. I was in disbelief. "You what?" I was stuttering. "Why the fuck would Dash?" "Tyler, I want to get to the bottom of this. Ken was our friend, and if these videos or that doctor guy has anything to do with his," he paused for a moment, "with his death, then we have to find answers." Colin was on his feet now, alive with vigor and purpose. I knew what he meant. I knew what we had to do. I didn't want to see another one of those videos ever again. I wanted to purge the memory from my psyche. I was petrified. Where Colin saw answers, I saw fear. He eyed me expectantly. I hung my head, silently walked over to the kitchen table, and sat myself down next to Colin. Without saying anything, he clicked on another video. The video opened up on the same white-walled room. A burly man walked in, escorted by Ken, who was again wearing a lab coat. They were speaking to each other, but the audio wasn't clear. The man seated himself in the same chair that Madeline had in the first video. Ken sat down across from him. The doctor from the previous video didn't seem to be in the room. "For the recording, could you please state your name?" Ken asked the man, enunciating the words. "Philip Jones," replied the man, folding his arms as he leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, Philip, do you believe in the paranormal?" Ken asked coldly. An icy tingle ran down my spine. "Ha! Hell no," Philip said brazenly, laughing almost. Ken got up and began outfitting the man in the same way he had done before, affixing cables to his chest and head. There was one extra step that he performed, though, one he hadn't done with Madeline. Ken fastened leather straps around Philip's wrists and ankles, belting him to the chair. Philip didn't really seem concerned by this. Ken placed the large headphones over Philip's head, then retreated to his side of the table again. "Mr. Jones," Ken said, looking down at his clipboard, "do I have your permission to begin the study?" "Yup," Philip replied gruffly. "Beginning sonic exposure exam now," Ken said for the recording. I fidgeted with my hands nervously. I looked over at Colin. His eyes were locked to the screen. "What the fuck?" Philip cried after a few moments, jerking his shoulders. "You motherfucker, get me out of this thing." Then he began screaming, spittle flying from his mouth. "I'm gonna kill you. Get me out," the man continued to bellow in desperation. Ken was deaf to his pleas, jotting down readings from the monitor calmly. Philip's screams became too much for me to bear. My mind was oversaturated with his agony. Just as I was about to tell Colin to stop the video, the feed cut out. Colin and I sat in silence for a moment, seeing our haunted reflections in the black screen. And then a high-pitched, eardrum-rupturing static noise began emanating from the laptop speakers. Colin turned the volume down, but the noise persisted. My vision became blurry, I felt paralyzed in my chair. And then I saw it, death. Grotesque images darting into my field of vision. I saw executions, mutilated corpses, dismemberments, beheadings, people being tortured. A soldier screamed in mind-shattering pain, his leg eviscerated into a mist of bone dust and gore. A woman, trapped in a house fire, wailed as blood-orange flames licked up at her body and attacked her, searing her skin first red and then a putrid black. Thousands upon thousands of these experiences were presented into my brain concurrently. And for each of them, I was there with these people. No, I was these people. I experienced their suffering. Overwhelming suffering impossible to describe in words. The collective misery and trauma of every single being that had ever existed, all playing out in my mind. I was crying. I fought through the images and saw Colin on his knees, his fists squeezing into his temples. Weakened, he tried clicking off of the video, but the screen was unresponsive. He held the power button down, but the static continued. Colin fell to the floor and put his face in his hands, sobbing loudly. The static intensified, turning into an otherworldly cacophony of bells and beeps. The haunting images grew more vivid. In the corners of my vision, I could see nearly formless dark figures. They were looking at me. They wanted something from me, I knew this. I didn't have anything to give them. Somehow I was able to communicate this to them. Then I understood, they wanted me to go with them, to follow them to where suffering is not a concept. They were right. I knew they were right. I could transcend the trivial existence of humanity's limited reality and exist in a plane my mind wasn't yet ready to conceptualize. But I would know soon. I would know it all. I had to go with them. I asked them how. They would guide me, I understood. I was overcome with elation, weeping tears of joy, knowing what was about to happen to me. And then they began moving away from me. No, I thought. Don't leave me. I begged and pleaded until they were gone. I realized that the sound had stopped, the haunting images along with it. Colin had managed to rip the battery out of his laptop, finally ending it all. The real world came back rapidly. Soon I would forget all about the dark figures and the plane beyond human comprehension. As if it were all just a dream. A dark, twisted, beautiful dream. Colin was in the fetal position, his deafening screams had turned into soft whimpers. I helped him up into a chair. We sat in complete silence, neither of us wanting to acknowledge what had taken place. And then, I swear, while the battery was disconnected, the laptop screen turned on. I wanted to grab it and throw it out of the window, but all the strength had been drained out of me. A video began playing. Ken looked into the camera. He looked ghastly. His skin was pale and cracked. His eyes were sunken in, black rings encircled them. He hardly moved, just staring at the camera with a flat, unwavering expression. It's impossible to say how long he stared. Minutes? Hours? He stood there, just peering through the lens. Then Ken began to speak. "Tell me, Tyler and Colin," the voice was rough and almost unrecognizable, "do you believe in the paranormal? Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.